What happens when being good starts to feel like self-destruction? You've done everything right. You listen, you accommodate, you offer compassion when you're tired, and support when you're breaking. You absorb moods, fix feelings, and try to keep your world emotionally balanced, and yet you're exhausted. You're beginning to feel like a ghost in your own life. There's a name for this: empathic self-erasure. And it's not sustainable. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed the pain of the psyche grows in silence until it becomes unbearable. He argued that the biggest crisis in our lives is not external chaos, but the gradual loss of the true self behind our carefully constructed persona. For empaths, those emotionally sensitive, perceptive individuals, this persona is incredibly dangerous. Because it looks like goodness, it looks like virtue and love, but inside it drains and it destroys. The reality is that radical empathy without boundaries isn't just exhausting. It's a trauma response masquerading as a moral code. This is the beginning of something far more important than being liked: becoming individuated, becoming whole. Not just empathic, but conscious. This script is about that journey. Subscribe for more content on shadow work, emotional healing, and becoming your true self. This is where transformation begins. Sensitivity isn't a gift. It's a survival strategy. Empathy, for many people, is not kindness. It's hypervigilance. You weren't born reading rooms and anticipating tension. You learned it because you had to. Jung once wrote that our personalities are shaped by what we must do to survive. For empaths, their gift of sensitivity often begins in environments where emotional unpredictability ruled. You monitored energy, absorbed emotions, minimized yourself to reduce conflict, or to stay connected. This isn't spiritual intuition. This is psychic armor built by a nervous system trained to decode threat through silence, tone, or expression. We call it empathy, but it's often survival sensitivity. Behind the mask of the nice one is a vigilant mind constantly reading others to manage their discomfort. And while this ability kept you safe, it disconnected you from your own feelings. You never learned to ask, what do I want? What do I need? What do I feel? Independent of someone else's reaction. This is not your essence, it's your conditioning. The truth is, sensitivity without boundaries isn't a superpower. It's a leak. What you called compassion was often a bypass of your own experience. Empaths heal not by becoming less sensitive, but by reclaiming where that sensitivity started and finally pointing it inward. The empath's lie: I am responsible for everyone's emotions. You think if they're unhappy, it has something to do with you. Here's the most dangerous lie empaths carry: if I can ease their pain, I should. And if I don't, I'm to blame. This belief is forged in childhood, often in homes where parental moods dictated safety. When punishment was unpredictable, love conditional, rage absorbed subconsciously, you learned to manage the emotional states of others as a form of control. Over time, being good turned into being responsible for everyone else's emotions. What Jung observed was the formation of a false self, a persona built to absorb and fix discomfort in the emotional field. He saw how these people often identified with the helper, the healer, the peacemaker. But there's a cost. When helping becomes an identity, neediness becomes guilt, and boundaries feel like betrayal. You start to think your worth is measured by how much of yourself you give away. You become deeply uncomfortable when others feel upset, because you've internalized the belief that peace is your job. This isn't empathy. It's enmeshment. The reality is you're only responsible for your part of the emotional dance, not theirs. And healing begins when you separate your identity from their reactions. The shadow of the empath: rage, desire, and the forgotten self. You walk into a room and you already know who's upset, even before they say a word. But you haven't felt your own emotions in weeks. Carl Jung described the shadow as everything you've had to reject about yourself in order to survive. And for empaths, the shadow often includes things like anger, desire, self-prioritization, assertion. Because early on you learned these traits caused tension. You replaced them with helpfulness, emotional suppression, and a constant scanning for approval. You shaped yourself into someone digestible, pleasing, and needed. But the shadow doesn't die just because it's buried. It leaks through passive aggressiveness, through unmet dreams, Through burnout, resentment, and self-neglect, Jung observed that the path of individuation runs directly through this darkness, not around it. For the empath, healing is not about becoming calmer. It's about becoming whole. That means feeling your rage, claiming your sexuality, admitting you don't want to fix everyone. It means telling yourself, I matter without sacrifice. Your shadow holds the parts of you that knew how to thrive, but weren't safe to express. The journey forward isn't about soothing the world. It's about integrating the self you had to forget. The death of the persona, when the mask falls off. You were the nice one, the loving one, the one who never needed anything until you collapsed. There comes a point when you realize the person others love most isn't the real you. It's your persona, the image you had to create to belong. Jung called this the most terrifying moment in one's psychological development, the shattering of the ideal self. For lifelong empaths, this moment feels like collapse. Everything you thought you were, helpful, easy, kind, starts to feel like a self-imposed prison. You no longer have the energy to pretend you're fine. The mask slips, and what emerges is the repressed, unknown self. This phase is what Jung called the night sea journey, a descent into chaos, uncertainty, and emotional rebirth. It's the ego's undoing, and it's often mistaken as a breakdown. But it's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough, the exhaustion, the disorientation, the alienation. These aren't signs of weakness. They're early symptoms of authenticity attempting to surface. You're not losing yourself. The false self is dying. You are being reborn, not to become better at boundaries, but to be someone who doesn't need to compromise their soul to be accepted. The energetic awakening, turning inward for the first time. When an empath stops giving their energy away non-stop, it doesn't vanish. It comes back home. Empaths often spend decades giving away their energy reflexively, managing crises, absorbing moods, micromanaging harmony. But here's the truth, energy isn't endless. It's not magic. It obeys the laws of containment. When you stop leaking your presence into every emotional vacuum, something profound happens. You begin to feel yourself again. Jung believed in the power of energy reversal. He observed that individually conscious people reclaim their projections, their misplaced attention, perceptions and roles, and call their power back inward. At first, this feels uncomfortable. You're used to being outward focused. You don't know what to do with your own space, your own silence, your own instincts. But soon something shifts. You start creating instead of clinging. You start feeling rested after social interactions. You begin to dream again. The empath who stops pouring into everyone else uncovers creativity, desire, rest, and self-trust. This is not detachment. It's reorientation. Your energy isn't leaving others behind. It's finally meeting you. Sacred selfishness, boundaries without justification. What if guilt isn't your moral compass, but a withdrawal symptom from codependency? Guilt is the final prison. After years of self-sacrifice, most empaths start to create boundaries. But the moment they do, guilt closes in. They feel anxious, ungrateful, cold, disloyal. But what if we told you that guilt isn't a sign of wrongdoing? What if it's the leftover emotion from a life spent overgiving? Jung wrote about individual integrity. He believed that only when a person owns their separateness can they enter into authentic relationship. Until then, we are not relating. We are merging, fixing, performing. Sacred selfishness is not narcissism. It's the radical act of choosing your wholeness over your likability. You stop justifying your no. You stop apologizing for needing rest. You stop explaining your worth through your usefulness. This transition is often met with resistance. People will say you've changed. They're not wrong. But they don't mean changed. They mean inconvenient. That's not your failure. That's their adjustment, and it confirms your healing. The relationship purge, letting go of conditional love. You begin to speak your truth, and people quietly start vanishing. There's no easy way to say this. Not everyone loves the real you. Some people only love the version of you that never said no, that listened endlessly, that shaped themselves to protect their egos. When you stop playing that part, when you begin to set boundaries, express honest needs, and no longer prioritize their comfort over your integrity, the masks fall, and so do the relationships. Jung called this the moment of differentiation. It's when your true self begins to emerge, and in doing so, burns away everything that depended on your false identity. What remains is truth. Some people stay, others leave. It isn't punishment. It's purification. Real connections aren't based on control. They're based on mutual authenticity. The empath's grief isn't just about who they lose. It's about who they never really had. And in this emptiness, something rare is born, room for real love to arrive. Individuation, when feeling becomes freedom. The empath isn't awakening into strength despite their sensitivity. They're awakening because of it. Carl Jung called his life's work individuation, the painful, courageous process of shedding the false self and becoming integrated, conscious, whole and internally aligned. For the empath, this is not a linear path. You don't wake up one day with perfect boundaries and emotional detachment. It's a series of breakdowns, truths, grief, resistance, distance, rebirths, but something changes. You stop apologizing for your existence. You stop filtering your presence through someone else's comfort. You stop shrinking to fit a role you were never meant to play. You begin to feel, not to absorb but to experience. You begin to love, not to prove but to connect. You begin to live, not for others, but with yourself. Your empathy doesn't disappear. It becomes conscious compassion, guided by truth, empowered by sovereignty. The empath who stops pleasing everyone doesn't become cold, they become real. And in that reality, they become whole,